At 2 a.m., my dad texted, "We've trashed your room. Your sister needs a playroom. You're 21. I was sitting in my dorm after a hard day of school, thinking it couldn't get any worse. But in that moment, my world fell apart. It wasn't just a room. It was the only part of the house that still felt like mine. I didn't see the message right away. It was almost 3 a.m. when my phone vibrated. At first, I thought it was one of my friends trying to drop another TikTok, like we used to do when we can't sleep. But no, it was from my dad. It was just, "We've trashed your room. Your sister needs a playroom. You're 21. At first, I didn't get it. I read it once, then again. I thought it was some kind of joke. But there were no smileys in the message, no hint of sarcasm. Just a dry, mundane fact, like they took out the trash or changed the curtains. I was sitting in bed, wrapped in my blanket, in my university dorm. It had been a rough day. I had failed my biochemistry exam, and my boyfriend Brian hadn't answered my messages for the second day. I was longing to go home, even though I was used to living on my own. But after that message, I felt empty. It was like someone had just deleted a piece of my life without asking. I tried calling my dad. There was no answer. I called my mom. The beeps. Then the answering machine. I wrote, "What do you mean? Are you kidding?" Silence. Then I went into the shared family chat. There was also a message from my dad, only now another photo, an empty room. My bookshelves, my photo board, even the bed my mom and I bought together when I was 15. All gone. And in the middle of the room, a colorful unicorn rug and a brand new PS5. A playroom for my 11-year-old sister, Ellie. My breath hitched. I sat staring at the screen, not knowing how to react. My hands started shaking. I wrote again, "Why did you do this without me? You didn't even tell me. It's my room." This time the answer came quickly. "You're 21, Casey. You're a grown-up. You have your own life. Ellie needs something too. We thought you'd understand." Understand? I understand that you've destroyed the only place that still smells like childhood? The only place I could hide from this crazy world when everything goes wrong? I stayed up until dawn. I cried. I remembered how we painted those walls turquoise, because I was dreaming of the ocean. How my mom would sew me curtains with little sailboats. How I would put up the first postcards from the festivals I went to on the wall. Every detail was like a part of me. And it was all erased, without warning, without my permission. In the morning, I still didn't have the energy to go out. I just sat there, like in a fog. My roommate, Meg, came in and saw my condition. "God, Casey, you look terrible. What happened?" I showed her the message. She put her hand over her mouth. "Did they really tear everything down?" I just nodded. That's so surreal. My parents would never do that. They might make me mad, but it's cruel. It was cruel. But the worst part was, they didn't care. They really didn't care how much it meant to me. They no longer saw me as their daughter who lived with them. I was just a former roommate. Meg brought me tea. She knew I didn't like coffee at a time like this. It made my heart beat too fast when my whole body felt like it was in a state of panic. We sat in silence as I slowly sipped from the cup, which warmed my fingers a little. Outside, the dawn was casting a thin lace of shadows on my wall. I felt even more abandoned. "And what are you going to do now?" she asked cautiously, sitting down next to me. "I don't know." My voice was hoarse. "I just want to cross them out. But they're my family." Meg swirled her tea in her cup. "Sometimes the people we call family do the most painful things. That doesn't mean you have to accept everything without question." I nodded. There was truth in what she said, but even the truth doesn't make it any easier. I picked up my phone and opened my photo album. I had a separate folder called Room Memories. It had photos from my birthday, when I decorated my room with balloons for myself. Photos with Ellie, when we built a pillow fort and she said I was the best sister in the world. She was 6 then. She looked at me with such adoration. What had changed? Then a photo of the bookshelves I had painstakingly arranged by color. A photo from the day I got sick, and my mom brought me chicken soup to bed. She said then, "This is your place of strength, recover here." Now, this place of strength has been given away under fortnight, I wrote to my mother again, without hope, but out of necessity. "Mom, you promised that the room would wait. You said that it would always be mine, no matter what." She didn't answer. I sat there, looking at the bubble with my last message. And suddenly, it dawned on me, I don't have a home anymore. The university dormitory is a temporary space. And now, my home, the one where I grew up, where all my firsts took place, is no longer mine. I don't even know where my things are now. Details began to scroll through my head. My diaries. I started one of them back in the 8th grade. It had everything. First loves, triumphs, defeats, anger at my parents, confessions that I was afraid to say out loud. What if they read it? What if they threw it away? All my thoughts, my deepest feelings were there. These aren't just things. They're parts of me. I couldn't stand it and called again. And again. Nothing. Until another answer came. This time, from my mother. Casey, you're very emotional. Dad and I have been thinking for a long time. Ellie is growing up. She needs space. You didn't plan on coming back, did you? We've taken some of your things to the attic. What's left? We've transferred them to the garage. If you need anything, come and get it. But please, don't make a drama. This is life. I reread that message 10 times. Don't make a drama. This is life. It's that simple. She didn't even ask what was important to me. She didn't mention the diaries, the books, or the broken flashlight I kept just like that, because I used it to read under the covers at night when I was 10. Everything is just things that seem unimportant to them. But these things are my pain, my memory, my experience. They threw me out, I whispered, feeling something tighten inside my throat. Just threw me out. Meg put her hand on my shoulder. Maybe it's time to create my own new home, without them. I thought about it. I'm still crying, I'm still torn, but there was a certain clarity in her words. Home isn't always where your bed has been since you were 13. Home is a place where you're respected, where you're heard. And my home was never perfect. But I believed it was mine. And that belief died in the message that came at 2 a.m. I stood in front of the door that I once opened every day without thinking. The door of my home. But this time, it seemed foreign to me. Even the paint on them was different, gray now instead of our old, peeling red. They replaced it. So did my room. I arrived without warning. I took the morning bus, sat on it for 5 hours, staring out the window, trying not to cry. There was something symbolic about the fact that I was holding a bag on my lap with the remnants of my life. A few things from the dorm, an old blanket, and letters my grandmother had written to me. She was the only one in the family who never underestimated my emotions. I stood in front of the door for 5 minutes. I couldn't bring myself to ring the bell. And when I finally gathered my strength, the door opened by itself. Ellie was standing on the threshold. Casey? She tilted her head like a puppy, not sure whether to be happy or to hide. Hi, I whispered, smiling through my strength. I didn't know you were coming. She glanced over her shoulder. Mom's asleep. I went in. The house smelled different. Less of cinnamon and my old perfume, more of some bleach and lavender air freshener. The living room had been rearranged. The TV was in a different place, a new couch. But the worst part was when I reached my old hallway. The door to my room was wide open. Inside were bright white lights, LED strips in the corners, wall graphics with games, and a pink gaming chair. I stepped inside, not recognizing anything. There wasn't even a scent of mine. Not the lavender oil I always drip before bed. Not my books. Not the old wooden table with scratches from my childhood manicure. Dad said you're grown up, Ellie said. And you're not coming anyway. I turned to her. She stood there with a guilty face, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Ellie, I'm not mad at you. It's just, we could talk. She nodded. I saw something familiar in her eyes, the fear of being superfluous. Maybe they hadn't explained everything to her either. Maybe she hadn't asked for it, and they had just given her the room. I headed for the attic, where my mother said my things were kept. Dust, boxes, and silence. There were plastic bins labeled with marker. Casey's books, Casey's personal stuff, old stuff. I started to open them one by one. In one was my diaries, in another, photo albums. And in the third, emptiness. Just a note. We couldn't keep everything. Sorry. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This wasn't just the destruction of space. This was the destruction of my past. My mother's voice came from behind me. Casey, why did you come up here? We said if you needed anything, just tell me. I slowly turned around. She was standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, in her bathrobe with a cup of coffee. I didn't ask to hide this. I didn't ask to be a guest in my own home. You're 21. You're an adult. We had to make decisions. Without me? Mom lowered her eyes. You don't have to come back here. You have a life on campus, my friends. You're not a kid anymore. I slowly put the lid on the box. I looked at it for a long time, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't coming back. And not because of the room, but because they no longer saw me as someone with a voice. I wasn't a child anymore, but I wasn't an equal adult to them. I was a convenient absence. You're right, Mom, I said quietly. I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not coming back. And for the first time, it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like freedom. I got back to the dorm late at night. Meg was waiting for me downstairs, even though I hadn't written what time I'd be arriving. She just knew I couldn't stand to stay there any longer than I had to. So what? Her voice was careful, but sincere. How did it go? I hugged her silently. I was silent for a long time, and only when we went up to our room, I was able to say, "You know what the scariest thing is? I don't even want to go back." She nodded, and we just sat in silence. Sometimes that's the best conversation. The next morning, I woke up with a clear feeling. Everything had changed. And not only I was frozen. This simple question revealed something very profound. I didn't know how to answer. My house had been erased, repainted, remade. I don't know yet, I replied. I guess it's nowhere now. She didn't press me. She just put a hot peach cobbler in front of me and said, "Then today, you're home here. Eat." And I cried. After that trip, I began to see things differently. I realized that I had lost more than just a room or things. I had lost trust, a sense of security, and also that invisible thread that had connected me to my parents through the years, the distances, the arguments. I wasn't ready to build myself from scratch, but I had to. I started simple. I bought a small wooden box and wrote on it, "My home." Every week, I put something important in there. A ticket from a trip, a note from Meg, a photo of new friends, an old keychain that I miraculously found in my bag, the same one that hung above my bed. I couldn't bring back the past, but I could build something new, my own, and maybe even better. I started writing it in the library. It's always quiet there, and the space seems to respect other people's experiences. I had an old softcover notebook in front of me, and a pen that was a little smudged. I couldn't write it on the keyboard. Too sterile. This letter had to be alive, scratched, honest. It began simply, "Hello, Mom and Dad. I don't know if you'll ever read this. And maybe it's okay if you don't, because this letter is not for you. It's for me, so that I can survive." I wrote slowly. Every word felt like it had to be torn out of me. I still remember my dad fixing my bookshelf when it fell over after I tried to hang a garland on it. He said, "This room has to withstand your storms." It did. You didn't. My fingers were shaking. I stopped, closed my eyes, remembering the first night I spent alone in the dorm. I felt like an orphan. Not officially, but inside, I absolutely did. I don't blame you for choosing Ellie. I love her. She deserves better. But the way you did it, the silence instead of talking, the erasure instead of dialogue, that's what hurts the most. I was lost in that room, and at the same time, I was lost in your family. I remembered how my mom always said, "You're too sensitive," and how I considered it my flaw. And now I was proud of the fact that I could feel deeply. This is not a weakness. This is my strength. I'm an adult. And so, perhaps I no longer have the right to a separate room in a house where another life already lives. But does being an adult mean being crossed out? Does the fact that I'm not under your roof mean that I'm no longer your daughter? I paused. My eyes swept around the library. A girl sat by the window, crying over some book. Our eyes met, and I thought about how many of us carry pain silently, and how often we refuse to admit it out loud because we're afraid to hear only silence in response. I don't know if I'll forgive you, and I don't know if I want it back. But I do know one thing. You lost a part of me. The part that wanted to share my life with you. And the part that waited for your, "How are you?" And you've lost my trust. And believe me, that's a lot more painful than losing your room. I put a period, but I didn't sign the letter. I didn't intend to send it. That's not what it was for. It was for me. To mend the cracks left by those few sentences in my father's message. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and left it at the bottom of the same wooden box where I had put the things that had become the foundation of my new home. The home I was building myself, of people who saw me, of things that made sense, and of decisions that were no longer born of pain, but of choice. It was a letter of farewell, not to them, but to the Casey who had once waited blindly for love. Life has no clear endings. There is no curtain that falls like in a theater when the scene is over. There is only a moment when you understand. There will be another chapter, and not necessarily an easier one. A month passed. Meg went to an internship in another state, and I was left alone in the room. At first, it was depressing. The silence flew off the walls like an echo of emptiness. But then I began to learn to be with myself. It was a new skill, not to survive, but to be. One day, an ad was placed in the dormitory. Stories from life, open mic, stories of how we became ourselves. I didn't plan to speak, but I sat there in the front row, and I listened to one girl talk about how she lost her brother in a car accident. The guy after her, about how he was thrown out of his house when he came out. Each story is a separate battle. I couldn't stand it. I took the microphone, and for the first time, I said it out loud. All the pain, all the absurdity of the situation. How I read the message at 2 a.m. that my room had been erased. How I had been erased, and how I had to find myself again in a city where nothing was familiar except my name. I'm 21, I concluded, and for the first time, I feel like I'm building a life not on the rubble, but on what I chose myself. Even if it started with a loss. People applauded, some cried, some came up later and thanked me. We all had stories. And the worst thing is not to carry the pain, but to have nowhere to share it. That evening, I opened Instagram and saw a message from Ellie. I found your old notebook. You had a list of books you wanted to give me when I grew up. I started reading one of them. It's the best thing I've ever read. Thank you. The tears came instantly. For the first time in a long time, not from the pain, but from the fact that at least a small part of me is alive, in her. And that weighed more than all the losses. I didn't write to my parents. They didn't write to me, but I didn't wait anymore. One morning, I took a wooden box, spread out everything in it on the bed, and realized, these are not just things. This is a map of my return to myself. The stories we don't choose are the hardest, but they are what make us those who know how to choose further. Ourselves, people, home. Sometimes home is not a place. This is the truth that you are no longer afraid to say out loud.